This is the new 2022 Hyundai Ioniq 5, and it's a rather quirky electric vehicle. You can tell that it's quirky from the moment you first look at it because the styling is a little unorthodox, and there is more quirk you discover as you poke around further. And today, I'm going to review the Ioniq 5 and show you everything. Before I get started, be sure to check out Cars and Bids, which is my enthusiast car auction website for cool cars from the modern era, now with free listings. You can list your cool car for free and auction it on Cars and Bids. And we've had some great sales recently, including this E39 BMW M5 brought $34,000. This fantastic Audi R8 V10 Plus sold for over $112,000. And this wonderful Subaru Impreza WRX STI hatchback brought almost $30,000. Those are excellent cars. If you're looking to buy or sell a cool, modern enthusiast car from the 1980s and up, Cars and Bids is the place to do it, with daily auctions and great selection at carsandbids.com. So let's talk Ioniq 5. Like I said, very quirky, fully electric, and even though it has kind of a hatchback look, this is intended to be a crossover, a rival for the Tesla Model Y and Ford Mustang Mach-E. Now pricing starts from around $40,000 and horsepower ranges from 170 in the base model to 320 in this version with dual motors and all-wheel drive. As for driving range, Hyundai says base model Ioniq 5s will do about 220 miles of range, while the top version is a little bit over 300. And as for the quirks, well, they're still to come, and today I'm going to show you all of them. First, I'll take you on a thorough tour of the Ioniq 5 and show you all of its quirks and features. Then I'll get it out on the road and drive it, and then I'll give it a Doug's score. Alright, I'm going to start the quirks and features, the Ioniq 5, by discussing the way it looks, because it looks strange. The overall shape of this vehicle is not really that unusual, but the lines, like this giant diagonal side line going the entire side of the car, just gives it a very strange and very distinctive shape compared to other electric vehicles, and frankly, other vehicles in general. Now, I recently reviewed the Kia EV6, which is Kia's version of this car. Same platform, same powertrain, same size, but the EV6 has a far more traditional look. If you want to go weird, you go Ioniq 5. I will say most of the people I've talked to like the way this looks. A lot of daring car designs are not well accepted, but this one has generally been pretty positively received, but it certainly is strange. Now, beyond the general weirdness to the shape and the look of the Ioniq 5, there are also some very strange details, like for instance, the taillight situation. You have a light bar going across the entire rear end and it's pixelated. It's made up of these little squares, and the light bar itself is rectangular. One of the strangest vehicle lighting things I have ever seen in any car. You can see when the turn signals come on, same deal, they blink in large rectangular pixelated form. A very, very strange look from the taillights, contributing to the strange overall look of this car. And if you thought the taillights were weird, how about the running lights up front, which are even stranger? Again, squares, or at least rectangles, these white bricks basically coming towards you, and when you turn on the turn signal, they flash as orange bricks. Again, very strange. This weird sort of pixelated, almost 1980s video game look really contributes to the strangeness of the Ioniq 5. And there's more strange still to discuss on the outside. How about the wheel arches that have this sort of cyclone pattern coming out from the wheel? Very unusual. Can't just have a normal wheel arch in this bizarre vehicle. And how about this color? Hyundai calls it cyber teal, and I think it's excellent. Most of the original press photos of the Ioniq 5 were shown in this gray color, but personally I like this better. Sort of blue, sort of green, depending on the light. Very interesting and very unusual, which fits with the whole theme theme of this car, frankly. And if you want weird on the outside of the Ioniq 5, we are not done yet. Let's talk about charging, or at least the charge port door, which is right here. Now, to open it, you tap on these little pixels, 5 of them, as you can see, arranged in a square, of course. Or you can hold down a button on the key fob, which I will. You hold that, and then the charge door pops open, revealing more pixels. This time, a series of squares arranged in almost like a triangle pattern. This shows your charging status when you have the car plugged in and you're charging. But the weirdest part of this charging situation is the car comes with an adapter that you can plug in, and it has a regular household outlet on the end, meaning that you can use the car to power stuff when you're out doing things. For instance, right now, I will use it to charge my cell phone, making the Ioniq 5 the world's largest portable cell phone charger, and frankly, the world's most expensive too. Now, I did an earlier video, like a preview video of the Ioniq 5, where I used this adapter to power an air compressor that I used to blow up a beach ball, and that's something you can do as well. Anything that plugs into a household outlet, you can plug it in here and use some of your Ioniq's charge to power your device or whatever it is. Anyway, you want to close this port, you just tap on the pixels on top and it closes up automatically. Very nice. But anyway, next we move on to the inside of the Ioniq 5, which is arguably even weirder than the outside. We start on the door sill where you can see it says Ioniq 5 and there's like a little square of pixels. You also have these pixels on the door panel, this like long row of pixels, and that is only a preview of the weirdness that's to come in this interior. Now, you climb in and the first thing you notice is this dashboard, long and flat. It doesn't have any like swoops or curves or really that much style to it like most modern vehicle dashboards. Instead, very simple, very flat, and it has 2 big screens mounted on it. You can see a gauge cluster screen directly in front of the steering wheel and then a center infotainment screen. Now, strangely, to the left of those screens, you have this little pad area. Looks like a speaker, but it isn't. It's actually a magnetic panel where you can mount magnets if that's what you want. If for some reason you want to stick a magnet on your car's dashboard, this thought has never occurred to me, but if it's occurred to you, well, the Ioniq 5 is the car for you because you have a magnetic panel next to your screens. Now, the gauge cluster screen is very bizarre. You don't have traditional dials. Instead, you can see it's just weirder, which fits perfectly with the rest of this car. And you can see a theme going on here. You have your speed on one side and the power that you're using over on the other side, and again, displayed in a rather unorthodox manner. One thing I love about this gauge cluster, when you change the drive mode, sport, eco, normal, it changes the display, but none of the drive modes have a traditional display. They all just have their own weird version of the weird gauge cluster display in the Ioniq 5, which is just so perfect. But drive modes, we're getting ahead of ourselves a little bit. Let's talk next about the steering wheel, which is certainly kind of strange. You can see just 2 spokes in the center, sort of flat. You have no upper or lower spokes like most car steering wheels. And while that is certainly weird, weirder still is the center. You don't have the Hyundai logo. It doesn't even say Ioniq 5. Instead, just 4 pixels. Again, you can kind of see a theme here. Now, coming off the steering wheel, bottom left, you have this little circle dial. This is your drive mode selector, and it's actually not a dial, it's a button. You push that to change between your different drive modes. Also on the steering wheel, you have these little panels and switches which control various functions like in most cars, like your stereo, that sort of thing. Here, they also control your driver assist system, which works fantastically. It's really, really excellent. It will steer for you, brake for you, and accelerate for you, and it does a great job of all of those things. Very simple, very easy to use, and great benefit, the steering wheel is capacitive touch, meaning that you don't have to like jiggle it to let the car know that you're paying attention. You can just rest your hand on it and that's all the input that it needs. Couple little drawbacks. One, capacitive touch wheel actually requires a little bit more of a grip than I would like. You can't just put your hand on it, you kind of have to grab. And also, this system will change lanes for you, which is excellent. Put on your signal and it will change lanes. Most vehicles don't offer that at this price point. The problem is it's unbelievably conservative. You put on your signal and it flashes like 7 times before it even begins to make a lane change, which is just disappointing. disappointing. It works, but you could do it faster yourself, and I suspect most drivers probably will. But moving on to more quirks of this interior. Another one is the gear selector coming off the steering column down here, which you can see is rather strange looking, and the operation is strange as well. In order to get it into drive, you twist the end of the gear selector upwards, and then you're in D. For reverse, you twist the end downwards, and then you're in R. Neutral is in the middle, and if you want to go into park, there's a big P button at the end of the stalk. You press that, and then you're in park. Rather strange, and frankly, it just looks like a big turn signal or wiper stalk coming off the column, but that's actually your gear selector. Now, speaking of the turn signal and wiper stalks, I must say I love that they have these little silver caps on the end. It's a really fantastic touch. So many of these stalks are cheap, crappy plastic, which is annoying because you touch it all the time. But automakers that really pay attention to detail will put on like a little silver cap like this in the spot where you touch, and that way it feels more premium, which I love to see here. It really is good attention to detail. Then, by the way, speaking of the stalks, the turn signal stalk has a fantastic function. You turn on the turn signal, and simultaneously a camera pops up in the gauge cluster showing your blind spot, which makes lane changing tremendously easy to do. And it works on both sides, shows exactly what's there, high resolution, a really, really good feature that a lot of Hyundai and Kia models have. And frankly, I wish a lot of other cars had it too. It's fantastically useful. But anyway, speaking of screens, let's move on to the center screen, the infotainment screen in this car, which is pretty good. It's excellent. It's very large, very wide, and it's intuitive. It's easy to use. It responds quickly to your touch. All those things are important to make systems like this good, and it has it. It also has the ability to display multiple things at once, so you can have like the map and the radio in one screen, meaning you don't have to go between screens to make adjustments, which is nice to see, and not all cars offer that. Also, another thing I love about the infotainment system is the surround view camera, or the perimeter camera, whatever you want to call it, this thing that like monitors the car from the outside. You can position it exactly where you want, like a little hovering helicopter showing precisely what's around you. Makes parking really easy, driving in tight spaces. Fantastic, great resolution, one of the best of these cameras I've seen. There are, however, a few drawbacks to this infotainment system. One is that the home screen is just not very good. You can see it here, and they clearly went with more of an artistic approach rather than a functional one, and it doesn't give a lot of great info or allow you to make any real adjustments on the home screen. You have to swipe over to the menu screen in order to actually really do much. Also, another drawback of this infotainment system is they've integrated the heated seat control into the screen, and accessing it is surprisingly difficult. In order to turn on your heated seat in this car, you first have to press this warmer button in the climate controls below the screen, and then that pops up like your heated seat controls, and from there you then turn on the heated seat. It's a two-step process in this car. Some vehicles integrate the heated seat into the screen, but it's always sitting there, you just tap it. Not here. You gotta go through two steps, and it's just not that good. Same deal with the heated steering wheel. First press warmer, and then you can go and actually turn on your heated steering wheel. I wish they hadn't done it that way, and frankly, they didn't have to. The climate controls, as you can see, are separate from the screen below, which is a good thing. Very nice, easy to use, but there's space there where they could have put the heated seat and steering wheel controls, but they chose not to and put it in the screen instead. Especially disappointing because the Kia EV6, which, like I said, is Kia's version of this car basically, it has distinctive buttons in the center console for the heated seats and the steering wheel. You just tap them and they're on, no going into the screen for that stuff. But anyway, next I want to move on to more interesting interior quirks, and there are many. For one thing, you have this strange pattern on these speakers on the door. You can see here tiny little speakers with this odd pattern, and that pattern is carried on to other places. For instance, the center console storage area, the surface at the bottom, also has this bizarre and unusual pattern, as you can see, and it's the same deal with the base of the cup holders. Again, this rather strange, rather quirky pattern to go along with the quirkiness of this vehicle. Now, speaking of the center console, should be pointed out, this can move forward or backward. You reach your hand sort of under the cup holders, and then you can move it forward or backward depending on like what's most comfortable or most convenient for you. Can't move far, but it can move a little bit, which I guess is kind of useful and rather interesting. Also worth noting about the center console, you have a wireless phone charger in here, which is of course nice to have, and you have a couple of USB ports. It's rather strange to see USB-A ports in this car instead of USB-C. This futuristic, weird, advanced Hyundai doesn't have the latest in USB technology, but at least there are ports. And by the way, let's talk seats for a second. You see the little pixels in the leather integrated into the design? kind of quirky and interesting. Same deal with the pixels on the backrest here, right below the headrest. More pixels for this very pixel-themed vehicle. And also with the seats, rather interesting, kind of notable is this. You can see here, this is a lower leg support, I guess, or like a thigh support, and you can extend it somewhat far out, maybe for extra comfort on road trips, although it doesn't come far enough to really support your thighs, and I'm not sure exactly how it would help your lower legs, but it's there in case you want it for some reason. But anyway, next we move on to the back seat in the Ioniq 5, and I gotta say, it is huge back here, impressively massive. I have the front passenger seat about where I would sit, and I have a ton of space back here. It really is big, and this is a big advantage to an electric vehicle because you don't have a massive engine up front to take up space. So you can move the wheels further forward and thus create a larger passenger compartment, which is exactly what they've done here. Big up front and big in back, especially for a vehicle this size. Although even compared to other EVs, this has more rear seat space, more than Model Y, more than ID4, more than Mach-E. It really is an impressively large back seat. With that said, not an especially quirky back seat. You don't have climate controls back here, which is a little bit of a disappointment, although you do have climate vents, which is nice, and you have more USB ports in back, which is of course also nice. I also like to see the sunshades built into the rear doors. Just pull on this tab and then you can clip them into place to block out like an infant from the sun. Nice to see. And there are a few rear seat quirks that are brought back from the front. For instance, the little pixels on the door panel, as you can see, and little pixels on the door sill as well. Just a reminder of the weird and quirky vehicle that you're in. But anyway, next up we move on to the cargo area in the Ioniq 5. You pop open the tailgate, and you can see the cargo area, which is, I would say, okay. It's not especially huge. It's deep. It goes pretty far back, but it's not very low. And also the sloping roof design of the Ioniq 5 certainly robs space for larger or taller items, so you get good practicality back here, but not huge. Now, it's worth noting you can get more cargo room if you remove the floor. The load floor actually pulls out completely, which gives you a larger space back here, and that's nice. Or you can keep the floor in place, and then you have like a space where you can put smaller items underneath the floor if you don't want them rolling around in the general cargo area. But that's what the cargo area is like in the Ioniq 5. And next up, if you're interested in more cargo space, you can get it up front. There's a little additional cargo compartment up here. Now, to access this front panel, there's a latch in the driver footwell, just like a hood latch in most vehicles. You pull that, it pops open, and then you can open it up the rest of the way and reveal this big plastic box that says EV on it. I guess reminding you that this car is electric in case you couldn't figure it out since you were accessing a cargo compartment where the engine should be. But anyway, you open up the EV box and you can see a little compartment up here. Not very big, not very deep, doesn't have room for a lot of stuff, but you can put your charging cables and that sort of thing up here if you don't want them taking up space in the back. Now, since we are up front, let's talk about powertrains with this vehicle. There are 3 different horsepower options with the Ioniq 5. Base model is rear-wheel drive with 170 horsepower. That version isn't out yet, but when it comes out soon, it'll cost around $40,000. Next up in the model line is the mid-tier version, which has 225 horsepower and also rear-wheel drive. This starts around $45,000, $46,000, and it has the longest range of any of the Ioniq 5 models, a little over 300 miles on a charge, which is pretty good. If you want all-wheel drive or if you want extra power, you gotta step up to this one, the top power version in the range. This has 320 horsepower, which is pretty healthy, and like I said, all-wheel drive thanks to dual motors, although it has slightly less range than the middle version. It's about 260 miles of range. Pretty good, but not exceptional in this segment. But 320 horses is pretty strong, and it sends us from 0 to 60 in the low 5-second range, which is a pretty good performance number for like a little mid-sized compact crossover. One of the reasons for that great acceleration number is the torque figure. If you get the 320 horsepower model, you also get 450 pound-feet of torque, which is real performance car levels. Now, speaking of the battery and the powertrains in this vehicle, I do want to talk charging for a second, because one of the benefits of the Ioniq 5 is fast charging. Hyundai says if you can find a charger capable of it, it can go from 10 to 80% charged in under 20 minutes. That is a really exceptional figure. It can basically add most of its charge back under 20 minutes, not really all that that long. So that's another good benefit of the Ioniq 5. It can charge a lot faster than most of its rivals if you can find the right charger. And so those are the quirks and features of the new Hyundai Ioniq 5. Now it's time to get it out on the road and see how it drives. All right, driving the Ioniq 5. Now I did do like a little preview video before the Ioniq 5, but I didn't have the chance to drive it or get quite as in depth as I did in this video. It was like a pre-production car, not everything was functional. But now I am here, I am driving the Ioniq 5, and it drives fine. Actually, the quirks and features is probably the most interesting part of this car. The way that it drives is less interesting. And I say that even in spite of the fact that it has 320 horsepower and 450 pound-feet of torque. Those are really substantial numbers, and yet it's just not as thrilling as some other vehicles. When you floor it, whoo, it's pretty quick. Especially from zero, it's quick. This car does have a little bit of a, it's not that fast when you're in the mid-range. I'm actually surprised by it. You press your foot down at 60 and it feels quick, but not like insanely fast or exceptionally fast or anything like that. But it's relatively fast when you floor it from a stop. The real problem though is steering and handling. I mean, it's not a problem. Steering and handling is not as good as like what you'd expect from like a performance vehicle. The Ford Mustang Mach-E just drives better. It's more engaging, more exciting, more thrilling, more fun to drive. And I think that that's just sort of a truth. This car isn't necessarily pitched that way though, so it's not necessarily a bad thing about it. It's not intended to be like a high performance electric crossover. It's just like an electric crossover with some power. And so just like Model Y, it feels relatively quick from a stop, but not particularly like exciting or thrilling in terms of handling. But with that said, there are some great benefits about the Ioniq 5 in terms of the driving experience. For one thing, it's nice and quiet in here. It feels, you don't hear much going on the outside, which is nice, and a lot of people like that about vehicles. It also sits up higher than you might think, which was also true of the Kia EV6. On the outside, these look like little hatchbacks, but when you're sitting inside it, it doesn't feel like that. It has kind of a crossover feel. Now, it doesn't sit as high as some crossovers or SUVs. It certainly doesn't. But it sits higher than like sedans and that sort of thing. And I think that's what a lot of shoppers are interested in, is just sitting up a little bit higher. It doesn't have like a full high seating position, but given the way that it looks on the outside, it has more of like an SUV kind of feel to it than you might expect. It's also relatively comfortable in here. Now, it's no like high-end, super crazy luxury car, but it's nice and comfortable. The seats are comfortable. The ride is compliant and soft. It feels good. Truthfully though, the real thing about the Ioniq 5 is it's weird on the outside, it's weird on the inside, but the driving experience is kind of ho-hum, and that's sort of the point of this vehicle. It's not really intended to be some crazy car enthusiast car. It's, I think, for people who want to stand out, want an electric car that's a little different, a little weird, a little special, but not necessarily people who are going to focus on like steering, handling, acceleration characteristics like car enthusiasts might. And I'll tell you, it does stand out. This is a weird, interesting, and quirky vehicle, and I think for people who, you know, electric cars in general are a little sort of weird and on the frontier, and this car takes it to a different dimension of strange. And I think there's going to be a lot of EV shoppers who like that, even though this may not offer like the most engaging or thrilling driving experience. And so that's the Hyundai Ioniq 5. This is a very interesting and unusual vehicle, to be sure, but there's a lot to like here. Good technology, great interior room, surprisingly decent performance, and styling that's, well, unorthodox, but it's generally been well received. If you're looking for an electric crossover, this one should certainly be on your list. And now it's time to give the Ioniq 5 a Doug score. And the Doug score is here, 65 out of 100, which places the Ioniq 5 here against other electric rivals. The Ioniq 5 beats out its sibling, the Kia EV6, by 2 points. The Hyundai is better looking and frankly cooler, and it wins on those merits. But more impressively, the Ioniq 5 is tied the Mustang Mach-E, which is an excellent gold standard in this segment. Both cars are exciting and high-tech. The Mach-E is a bit more engaging to drive, but the Hyundai has a cooler look. But both cars make me more excited about the electric car future.